So orange cheese, the slices of cheese that we all grew up on, the government doesn't allow the companies that sell it to call it cheese because it has to be more than 51% cheese to call it cheese. So they call it slices, American slices. Look at the label next time.
I got to ask you about this. You mentioned in the book that a top executive at Pepsi told you how excited he was that they had learned how to grow and harvest human taste buds in a lab. First of all, why did Pepsi let you in? Don't they know who you are? Second of all, what's up with this? This is kind of like some creepy, futuristic stuff here.
Well, Pepsi has a whole meme. They go, well, there's food that's good for you, and there's food that's fun for you. Now, what they mean by fun is literally fun in the sense of like an addictive party drug. Because the foods that they produce are designed to create addiction and to hijack your brain chemistry and your metabolism and your taste buds. In fact, I met with the vice chair of Pepsi, nice guy, smart guy. He was the head of the Mayo Clinic endocrinology, which is, no shabby job before he got the job at Pepsi. He's also a diabetic. And he was sitting at dinner with me and he was eating, pasta, bread, desserts, sugar. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're diabetic. He says, no, if I take my medications and I run and I jog, I'm fine. And I'm like, well, let me get this straight. Is 1,800 calories of Pepsi the same as 1,800 calories of almonds or broccoli? He goes, yes. And I'm like, well, how does that make sense, even intuitively, right? We know now that all calories are not the same. So they have a very clear view that all calories are the same. So it doesn't matter if they're Coca-Cola or Pepsi calories or Dorito calories, as long as you don't eat too many and you exercise, you lose weight. And that is one of the biggest myths out there. Eat less, exercise more will cause weight loss is just simply wrong. It's the quality of the food, not how much you eat, that matters.
Right.
And then he said, Mark, guess what? We got this Westchester lab. We've harvested taste buds. We're actually going to create models where we can stimulate those taste buds and see how to maximally sort of create pleasure. And it's like, I'm like, whoa, you don't want to be telling me that. He says, come visit. I'm like, yeah, but you don't, there's something called social media. You don't want me like advertising this stuff for you. And I was like, and he was really sincere about it. Right. And he really felt this was a good thing. But when we look at, the data on this, it's frightening. There's a guy named Michael Moss who wrote a book called Salt, Sugar, and Fat about the food industry, and he interviewed 300 food industry executives and scientists and people who work for the food industry. And he found that internally they have things called taste institutes where they hire craving experts. These are scientists designed to create addiction, that know how to use chemicals to alter your brain chemistry to create what we call the bliss point of food. And then they talk about heavy users. They want to create heavy users. So rather than getting someone like me to drink soda, they're going to go to the people who are already using and get them to use more. Instead of drinking a liter of soda, they want them to drink 2 liters of soda a day. And they target the poor and the minorities. And they seem like good actors and corporate social responsibility, but it's all a big charade to sell more products and privatize the profits and socialize the costs by all the fallout from consuming those foods on health, on our economy, on our agriculture. So it's really kind of a mess. And I think people don't understand the implications of the food they're eating, and it's not just a personal choice. They're having, with every bite of food they're taking, they're impacting our soil, our water, our environment, climate change, their health, the economy, our social structures, poverty, violence. Everything is connected to the food we eat.
This is, first of all, this is messed up, but also it's kind of inspiring at the same time. Mark, it was probably 10 years ago. I was listening to a lecture that you did, and I didn't share this with you before, but you're the first person I heard use this term, and it struck me. Like, it literally just...
What did I say?
No, this is incredible, and I've shared this statement many times, is that food isn't just food, it's information, right? Food isn't just food, it's information. And so we've got scientists who are world-class, some of the smartest people around, who are working on finding a way that when you bring in this particular data from a processed food, from soda and things like that, to maximize the response and the addictive response in the body to get you to eat more of this food and like be masterful, because it's not even real. That's the thing. It's not even real food. So I want to talk now about, you mentioned earlier that, calories are not created equal, and what we're looking at here is, what is this calorie? Let's take the comparison of broccoli and Doritos, right? Yeah. This is going to impact your body very differently if it's 300 calories of each. And why is that? What is the main component behind the scenes Why are they different in how they affect us?
Well, what we now know is that every time you take a bite of food, it affects your hormones, your brain chemistry, your metabolism, your gut flora, your gene expression, your immune system, right? And it's not the calories that do that per se, it's the quality of the information in the food.
Right.
So you can turn on all the signals for health and disease by eating a Dorito. Same calories, you're turn on all the signals for health and healing eating, let's say, broccoli or almonds. And it's a very, very different effect. If, for example, let's just take like a great example of like a big gulp, right? A big gulp is 750 calories. It's got 46, oh no, it's got, I think, I don't know, ridiculous amounts of sugar, like 70 something grams of sugar. It has no fiber. When you consume it, it causes your liver to become inflamed. It causes your triglycerides to go up, your HDLs to go down, your body to produce insulin. It stores belly fat. It lowers your testosterone. It makes you hungry. It causes you to lose muscle. It increases stress hormones. All these things are happening dynamically when you consume a big gulp. If you have 750 calories of broccoli, that's 21 cups of broccoli. I mean, good luck if you can eat 21 cups of broccoli. It's
Right.
got, 35 grams of fiber. It's got no sugar. It doesn't affect your body in the same way. It doesn't turn on insulin. It doesn't make you have a fatty liver. It doesn't screw up your cholesterol. It doesn't lower your hormones. It actually increases detoxification, prevents cancer, helps you detox metals, helps increase your healthy gut flora. Exactly the same calories, profoundly different effects on the body.
That's so powerful. Just for us to really kind of take a second and like let that sink in, that the whole thing with this calorie myth that all calories are created equal, this has long been banished. And you even have research in your book indicating how, particular foods, if somebody eats maybe a higher ratio of healthy dietary fats, that they'll actually lose more weight over the same amount of time, not doing any more exercise, compared to people who are eating a higher carbohydrate diet with same calories.
Yeah, exactly. So what we now know is that certain calories raise insulin. Carbohydrates predominantly, mostly grains or flour particularly, and sugar, or anything that turns to sugar. And that fat doesn't raise insulin. So if you take, for example, a type 1 diabetic, this is an easy example for people to understand. They don't make insulin. Their pancreas shut down. These people are eating 10,000 calories a day. They're not gaining a pound. They're losing weight eating 10,000 calories a day, right? Because they have no insulin, and insulin's required to store the fat. And they're eating carbs, they're eating sugar, they're eating fat, whatever. They're eating whatever, but they still can't gain weight because they have no insulin. When you eat carbohydrates, you spike insulin and it stores fat. It slows your metabolism. It locks the fat in the fat cells. It makes you hungry. When you eat fat, you don't produce insulin. So if you reduce carbs dramatically and you increase fat, you can't combine them because that's deadly. I call that sweet fat. You actually will increase your metabolism by about 300 to 400 calories a day. That's like running an hour a day without getting off the couch, even if you're eating the same amount of calories. And this study has been done. In fact, last week in the Journal of the American Medical Association, there was an amazing article about ketogenic diets and type 2 diabetes and weight loss, showing that when you dramatically increase fat in the diet, you correct all the cardiovascular risk factors, you increase the speed of your metabolism, you cause far more weight loss. In type 2 diabetics, you get them off insulin, off their medications, and their blood sugars are better than when they were on medication. And I see this all the time. We're at Cleveland Clinic, and we've run pilots where we've taken the most treatment-resistant diabetics who are on tons of meds, on insulin. We get them off all of that in 8 weeks, and their blood sugars are far better and almost normal compared to the ones when they were on the drugs. So we have the ability to actually show how this is working. And there's a big study going on now at Harvard. It's a $12 million study funded independently by a philanthropist who wants to show this. And they're locking people in a resort. They're feeding them either a very high-fat diet, very low carb, or the opposite, low-fat, high carb. And they're measuring what happens on the same amount of calories. And they're seeing what they take in, what their metabolism is. And the data is just so compelling. And yet the truth is, Shawn, that every doctor, nutritionist, public health association, government, food industry, all still say the mantra, eat less, exercise more. It's based on outdated science, and it's harmful for people because it blames the victim. It's your fault, you're fat, just eat less, exercise more. Well, if your brain's hijacked, willpower is a fiction. You can't, right?
Right. well, first of all, I'm thinking about even the American Diabetic Association, the recommendations for nutrition, and they're literally telling people to eat foods that can spike insulin. Yeah. And the reality is this. And so, by the way, this is gonna, I'm gonna have a little controversy here today because, there's films out there like What the Health, right?
Oh yeah.
Where there's a
licensed great propaganda movie.
A licensed physician saying, you know what, diabetes is not caused by sugar, it's caused by fat intake. All right. So before I see you like, all right. So here's the thing. Listen, guys, this is what I want you to do. Make sure to pick up Dr. Hyman's new book, Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? Because let me tell you this, all of us, everybody listening, all of us, our family, we understand there's a lot of conflicting information out there. And there's a lot of different choices. And there are a lot of things that are right. And there are also some things that are pretty dangerous that are considered to be right. And so what he's doing is taking the best of each of these fields, whether it's vegetarian food, whether it's paleo food, whether it's a ketogenic approach. And he's looking at, let's actually look at the data. Let's have a talk about it and also use our rational common sense in the mix, So before we get to the controversy, I want to know what inspired you personally to write this. I know for me, this is one of the things we work on here with the show is drilling down and getting to the heart of the matter. So what was the inspiration for you?
Well, the inspiration is I've been studying nutrition for 40 years. I've read tens and thousands of papers. I've treated tens of thousands of patients. And the question that always comes up is, what should I eat? Yeah. People just are confused. They don't know. They don't understand. And they're making bad choices, not because they don't want to do the right thing, because they just don't know. And I think there's so much conflicting information out there. One day eggs are good, bad, then they're good. One day steak is bad, then it's good. One day butter's bad, then it's good. Or one day oatmeal's good, then it's bad. It's like enough to make anybody crazy and just say, heck with it. I give up and I'm going to eat whatever I want. Right. The truth is, we know a lot. When you combine the full body of scientific literature, not just cherry picking studies that support your point of view, and you look at the clinical picture, which, I have a rare opportunity because I've been testing metabolic rates and nutritional status and blood tests and cholesterol and cardiovascular risk factors for 30 years and using diet and food to manipulate those numbers and to affect the quality of people's health. So I've seen this. It's not just some crazy idea I have that I read in a book. It's actually based on experience, plus common sense, plus sort of a sense of our evolutionary biology and what makes sense. Does it make sense for us to consume 1,000 times more refined vegetable oils than we did 100 years ago? Probably not. Does it make sense for us to consume, 150 pounds of sugar when we maybe had 22 teaspoons of sugar a year when we were out hunting gathering? Probably not, right? These are just common sense things. So you combine all those things, and I really felt like people needed to get a book where they will go one-stop shopping and look at each category of the foods we eat: meat, poultry, fish, dairy, vegetables, fruit, nuts, seeds, beans, grains, sweeteners, sugars, beverages, and know what to choose in each of those categories based on, one, what's the science, what it does to your body, the effects on the planet, on human rights, and on our greater society. So you can make an educated choice about eating food that's good for you, good for the planet, and good for the world. And I think that's really the goal of this book. Is very simple, very clear, addressing all the key topics of controversy. So if you've ever said, what about blah, it's in the book. Because I've been asked these questions so many times, so I know the questions that people have. And I've sifted through the science and made it really simple and clear. So by the end, you have resources of where to go. Let's say you want to find the cheap grass-fed beef online. Where do you go? Let's say you want to know which vegetables should you eat organic or not and what matters. Here's where you go to find out. And I go through all that in the book, and it's hopefully a guide that people can use forever. You can keep it in your kitchen. You can keep it with you when you go to the grocery store. You can share it with your friends and family. It's really, for me, I feel like my favorite book I've ever written because it gives people a holistic view of food and nutrition. And it also includes some of the political, social, environmental aspects as well.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that was very enlightening to see as well. So that's what I want to talk about is let's jump back now and look at this controversy, right? When we have a physician out there who's, sharing this propaganda, something that is like this is totally against human physiology, saying that it's fat that's causing diabetes. So let's talk about that. You have a section in here talking about fats and oils. So where did this insane information, and by the way, let's start with the coconut thing, right? Coconut was slammed in the media a little while ago. It was everywhere. People were posting me, Shawn, what do you think about this? So let's
Yeah.
talk about saturated fat and the truth about whether or not it's fat that's really bad for you or whether it's this issue with insulin.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. Yeah, it's such a controversy. And I think, what you said in that movie, What the Health, was, a guy in a white coat who seems like an intelligent man who's a trained physician with a license says sugar and carbohydrates have nothing to do with diabetes or obesity. And another guy in the movie says, Garth Davis says, carbohydrates can't be stored. Only fat can be stored. Now, this is just basic biochemistry. And maybe they missed their biochemistry class. And the reason they believe this is not based on science, it's based on dogma. So you can't let your beliefs and your dogma overtake science and disrupt your point of view. I don't have a particular belief. I've been a vegetarian, a vegan, I've been paleo, I've been everything in between. And, I'm trying to understand what works. I'm curious about what really works. Now, this whole issue about fat, I wrote a whole book called Eat Fat, Get Thin, where I address this in detail.
Yeah.
But the issue is really how do we understand what happens when you eat fat and sugar? We touched on it. But if you eat fat, it seems logical that fat makes you fat, right? It's the same word. It looks the same when you cut it open. And it seems like it has more calories and carbs and protein. So logically, if you eat less fat, you're going to lose weight. Problem is biology is not so simple.
Yeah.
And when you eat fat, you actually stimulate metabolism. You cut your hunger. You release fat from the fat cells. It's called lipolysis. You actually stimulate your metabolism to burn 300 calories more a day. Whereas if you eat carbs and sugar and starch, even a lot of grains, you raise your insulin. And insulin is the key hormone that's driving almost all chronic disease, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes to Alzheimer's, and even things like depression. So we have to understand that as long as we have high insulin levels, we're going to be struggling to lose weight and to feel healthy and reverse disease. So that's why this whole movement towards higher fat diets is happening. In fact, even the Dietary Guidelines Committee removed any upper limit on fat, and they said cholesterol is not an issue anymore. They're still restricting saturated fat. And here's the problem. You asked about coconut oil. I did a Facebook Live on coconut oil. There was like over 1.5 million views, and I'm like, holy cow, people are so confused.
Yeah.
And you've got the American Heart Association, which, by the way, gets most of its money from the food industry and the pharma industry, as well as the American Diabetic Association. The American Nutrition Dietetic Association gets 40% of its funding from the processed food industry. I mean, they're the ones giving us nutritional advice.
Right.
So when the American Heart Association put out this report, they said coconut oil is bad because it has saturated fat. Now, here's the problem with that logic. There's never been a single study that's ever proved that coconut oil causes heart disease. It's guilt by association. So this all came back 50 years ago or more from this guy, Ansel Keys, who said, let's study a few countries and see who gets what and what they're eating, and maybe we can find out the cause of heart disease. Well, he found out that people ate more fat, and saturated fat had more heart disease. Turns out he left out a lot of countries that disproved his theory, like France, that ate butter and cream like it was going out of style, and they had the lowest heart disease risks, right?
Yeah.
And then never really proved it. And then that became the meme, and he was a very powerful figure and actually convinced the world of his point of view, which turned out to be wrong. And then we moved on to the late 60s when two nutrition scientists at Harvard and doctors were paid by the sugar industry, the equivalent of $50,000, to publish a study in the New England Journal, which at that point didn't require a conflict of interest statement, to show that fat was the enemy and sugar was fine. Well, that went on. That guy went on to run the government's Dietary Guidelines Committee on the first one under George McGovern, and that led to this whole era of low fat. And then we got the food pyramid, and we went in this whole spiral. And if you look at the statistics, you see that when we came out with the food pyramid, the guidelines, the rate of obesity and diabetes skyrocketed like a hockey stick.
Yep.
And now we're kind of turning the tide back a little bit. It's very hard. And I think most people still believe that fat is bad. They eat skim milk, low-fat yogurt, low-fat foods, low-fat salad dressing, and this is really dangerous. Now, the key thing to remember is you cannot add fat to your diet if you're still eating starch and sugar, right? A little bit, okay, but if the majority of your diet is grains and starch and sugar, it's deadly. So I would really never do that. Coconut oil is something that does raise cholesterol. So their view is if you have saturated fat, it raises cholesterol. Cholesterol causes heart disease. Cholesterol causes heart disease, and you shouldn't actually eat anything that raises your LDL cholesterol. Well, that whole theory has kind of been broken. And here's how, a couple of reasons. One, it was a major study actually done by the guy who was trying to prove that saturated fat was bad, Ansel Keys, and another guy, a researcher, I think from University of Minnesota, back in the late 60s and 70s. This kind of study could never be done today because it's unethical. They took 9,000 people who were basically institutionalized in mental institutions, and they did an experiment on them without their consent, and they gave half of them saturated fat and half of them corn oil. And then they followed them, which is almost impossible to do this kind of study anywhere else because people live in their free world, they eat whatever they want, you can't control their diets. So they controlled their diets, and they found that the group that had the corn oil actually lowered the LDL cholesterol. That was good, but for every 30-point drop in LDL cholesterol, there was a 22% increase in heart attacks and death. So the lower your cholesterol, the worse you were. And the saturated fat group did way better. They didn't publish the study. Why? Because it contradicted their entire worldview. So they stuffed it in a basement. And it wasn't until last year that researchers from the National Institutes of Health dug it up and actually published it and was like, what?
This is sounding like a movie right now, Mark.
Oh my God. Malcolm Gladwell did a great revisionist history podcast on this. It was really quite good.
Oh,
and then, of course, we have 17 meta-analyses of studies showing there's no link between saturated fat and heart disease. None. From observational studies, from interventional studies, from blood levels of fatty acid studies. Nobody can find a link when they actually looked at it. It was just all an idea.
Yeah.
And so now we still have this idea that saturated fat is bad, and the American Heart Association is still stuck on that. And so that's why they say coconut oil is bad because it's saturated fat. Saturated fat raises LDL. That causes heart attack. That theory's just been debunked.
You know what? I think at some point in human history, maybe 10, 20 years from now, maybe a little bit longer, this is going to become a movie. And it's going to star Nicolas Cage, for sure. And he's just like national treasure. Somebody's digging around in research, and they find this old, wait a minute, it was a conspiracy. The whole time.
They found this old file. Just like dig up in the basement.
That's nuts, But the good news is, again, is that, folks like you who are out here and sharing the reality of the situation and also pointing people towards better options. So I want to ask you about, because also with coconut oil specifically, and we talk about saturated fats, we're not including the fact that this is from coconut oil. So what we tend to do is we isolate nutrients versus the food. So let's talk a little bit about that issue.
So, first of all, going back to the coconut, there's populations that lived in the South Pacific, 60% of their calories were coconut oil. And they had no heart disease, obesity, diabetes, nothing, right? So the evidence for this coconut oil thing is bad. Now, the coconut oil also has many of their benefits. It's got polyphenols, antioxidants in virgin coconut oil, and the coconut oil also has something called MCT oil, which is a powerful metabolism booster, brain activator, and metabolism sort of activator. It's really, really an impressive compound. So coconut oil overall has a lot of benefits. And I think that, we really shouldn't vilify it. And I think the whole saturated fat thing with it just doesn't really make sense. And yet some people genetically have a harder time with saturated fats. That's true. But as a whole, we're really okay with that.
So there's actually a term, isn't there, for when we're looking at studying nutrients instead of the real food?
Yeah, we call it nutritionism. Yeah. So we get focused on like saturated fat or refined or like PUFAs or on a mineral like magnesium or some fiber, right? And this is what the food industry does. It works for them, right? If we say fiber is good, whole grains are good, well, they'll make whole grain Cookie Crisp cereal. Now, that is not healthy. It's got 22 teaspoons of sugar in it, right? Honey Nut Cheerios sounds good, right? Honey Nut, all these healthy things, right? It's got more sugar in a serving than 3 Chips Ahoy cookies.
That's crazy. It's not,
right?
It's a cereal that, this is what they say, is Jerry Seinfeld. It's not a cereal that's like cookies. It is cookies.
Right, it is cookies. It's basically breakfast. Actually, not really breakfast. It's dessert masquerading as breakfast.
Exactly. Except tricks. They say it right out in front, like, "Hey, we got you," right? Trick or treat. So
Right. Yeah.
let's shift gears now because this is an amazing community who is really about elevating themselves, becoming educated in nutrition. We've got folks who are vegetarian, following vegetarian protocols, paleo, ketogenic, and here we're very inclusive and just looking at how can we all work to be the best version of ourselves. And so collectively, what I want to point people to and to talk about is something that we can all agree upon that you talk about here in the book, and you bring some serious highlights that, again, things that oftentimes we don't consider in vegetables. All right. So there's actually some potential. We got a special guest here. So
my kitty. This is Yoda.
Yoda. Oh, Yoda is. Hopefully, you guys can see the video.
So he looks like Yoda. If you go like this, he goes. Oh,
definitely.
Love you, I do.
So, man, I totally forgot what I was gonna say. Yoda is so cute. Oh my goodness. All right. So vegetables, right? This category of foods. This is something we can collectively agree on. Nobody's like, you know what? Vegetables are terrible for you. But there are some things that we need to be concerned about. So let's talk about this category and why you put a whole section in here of the book on it.
Well, I wrote a section on every group of food we eat. Like you said, I'm not focusing on nutrients. I'm not writing a chapter on saturated fat or on, carbohydrates. I'm writing chapters on the food that we eat: meat, chicken, fish, poultry, fruits, vegetables, grains, right? So I want to actually make it simple.
Yeah.
Because we don't eat ingredients, we eat food.
Right.
And in terms of vegetables, the sad thing is that most Americans don't eat much vegetables. The number 1 and 2 vegetables we eat are potatoes in the form of French fries and tomatoes in the form of ketchup. Now, neither of those should be considered vegetables because they're, one, full of harmful compounds. The ketchup is mostly sugar, and the French fries are deep fried in processed oils, and that turns into dangerous carcinogenic chemicals like acrylamide, and it's fat and carbs, which makes your insulin go up and gain weight. So it's just, these are not vegetables we want to be eating. And in fact, the most common vegetables are the least healthy, and the most healthy are the least eaten. So we kind of have to flip that upside down. And in the book, I talk about how to choose the right vegetables, and I also talk about how to be aware of where the contaminants are. I work for the Environmental Working Group. I'm on the board, and we've created a guide called the Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. Dirty Dozen is these dozen fruits and vegetables you want to stay away from if they're not organic. These Clean 15, probably not such a big deal. They're not so contaminated. But strawberries, like, forget it. You never want to eat a strawberry if it's not organic. And I go through that in the book, and I go through really what we should be eating. Certain vegetables may not be as healthy, like alfalfa sprouts people think are a health food, but they contain a toxic carcinogenic compound. So you don't want to consume a lot of alfalfa sprouts. Or white button mushrooms are in salads. They have a toxin also in there you want to be aware of. But most of the time, most vegetables are pretty good. Now, starchy vegetables, depending on your metabolism, may not be as good for you. If you're a type 2 diabetic, you don't want to be eating a lot of potatoes and big starchy vegetables. But if you're not, those are great to include in your diet.
Yes. I'm so glad that you focused on this and really kind of pulling back the curtain and really looking at this because, and this is something that we think about, but we might not really, really get. Number 1 vegetable consumed, potatoes. All right.
Yeah.
Right? Barely really a vegetable.
Well,
and then
French
we've got,
fries.
and then listen, Mark, this is so crazy. Like, you literally detailed my childhood here. So you got potatoes, number 1, ketchup, literally, I would tell people that I'm part ketchup. When I was a kid, I'm like, I'm black and I'm white and I'm part ketchup. Like I'd like, mix up these things and I'd be like, and I'm
black
part
and white and red.
I'm part orange as well. Right. I'd say red. See, how'd you know? You were there. You must have been there. And I'd say I'm orange because of all the cheese. Now, so that's number 1. Number 2 is ketchup.
By the way, wait. Cheese, you said orange because of the cheese. So orange cheese, the slices of cheese that we all grew up on, the government doesn't allow the companies that sell it to call it cheese because it has to be more than 51% cheese to call it cheese. So they call it slices, American slices. Look at the label next time. It's illegal to call it cheese because it's mostly ingredients that aren't actually food.
Nuts, man. Kraft, macaroni, and whatever, right? All right, so listen. All right, so those are the top 2. Number 3 is sweet corn, which that was on the menu. And 4 is onions, which is surprising.
Onions are okay.
And then 5 is, you put the inglorious iceberg lettuce. And so this is something that gets me, people like, well, I eat salads. I eat salad every day. What kind of salad are you actually eating? You know, and so this was my life, minus the lettuce. I
Yeah.
didn't really mess with that. But this is,
Iceberg lettuce.
yeah, you know, so again, and oh, guys, I gotta point this out too, and this is what you highlighted here when you mentioned. So first of all, you pointed out that farming is actually one of the most dangerous occupations. You know, the folks
Oh,
that
yeah.
are dealing with pesticides and herbicides, rodenticides, and the increased incidence of kidney, pancreatic, prostate cancers.
Hmm.
And in
Parkinson's
2000,
disease, yeah.
crazy stuff. 2015, funded by the EPA, found that consumers who often or always bought organic had significantly less insecticide in their urine, even though they ate 70% more produce than people who bought the conventionally grown fruits and vegetables.
Yeah,
Nuts.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
literally coming out of our bodies.
I mean, honestly, if we were food, we wouldn't be safe to eat. We're so polluted.
Wow, that's deep.
You do fat biopsies and you look at people's storage of pesticides, DDT, DDE, dioxins,
Mm.
I mean, atrazine. I mean, it's terrible what's in us. I mean, it's frightening. That's why I take saunas all the time and take a lot of cruciferous vegetables, and why I take things to supplements to help me detoxify, because we are a toxic waste dump.
That's nuts, Mark. I can't believe you just said that. We wouldn't be good to eat. So that's a question for everybody to think
If
about.
we were food, we would not be safe to eat.
Would you eat yourself? All right. That's the big takeaway from today. Ask that question daily as you're taking care and eating good food.
It's like
would you eat yourself?
the cannibals have a list. You know, they like, don't eat Americans. You know? It's like, don't eat tuna because it's got too much mercury.
All right, so let's shift gears here and talk about the thing that usually is coupled with vegetables, which is fruit. You know, when I went to a traditional university and I was taught about the food pyramid at this point, this is when I was in school, and you know, we were told to eat, I believe it was 5 to 7 servings of fruits and vegetables. And that is pretty vague, right? Because it could just be, you know, 4 servings of fruits and 1 vegetable. So let's talk about fruit and some of the kind of really just kind of jarring issues with fruit. So let's start with the conversation about fructose.
Oh, well, okay. So people go, well, fructose is in high fructose corn syrup. And there's anywhere between 55 to 70 or 80% fructose in sweeteners that are used in most foods in America today. And it's not combined like in sugar. Regular sugar is glucose and fructose that's together in a double bond. This is free fructose. So it's absorbed very quickly. It goes straight to the liver. It causes fatty liver. It causes inflammation, causes weight gain. It's very harmful. And we are consuming huge amounts of this in everything. It's in salad dressing. It's in ketchup. It's in bread. I mean, they put high fructose corn syrup in bread, for Christ's sake. So that's really the problem. It's not the fructose that's in fruit, because it comes in a package. It comes in a package of fiber, of vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So it's okay to eat it. The problem is what fruit, when, and how much, and for who. So if you're a type 2 diabetic and you eat, you know, a pound of grapes, you're going to be in trouble, right?
Yeah.
If you're an athlete and you're consuming more fruit, you'll probably handle it fine. And it's important to say fruit, not fruit juice, right? You look at Coca-Cola and Pepsi bought Odwalla and Naked Juice. And now you go to look at one of those in the airport, it looks like a healthy green juice or vegetable or fruit juice. You look at the label, it's like drinking 2 Coca-Colas in terms of the amount of sugar that's in there. So it's not necessarily fruit in juice or fruit in smoothies, which can be, I mean, how many apples can you eat, right? You can drink 5 apples in a glass of apple juice, but you're not going to eat 5 apples. And then you got all the fiber and nutrients to prevent the absorption. So unless you're really overweight, diabetic, you want to keep your fruit to a minimum then. You know, and eat the low glycemic fruits. I talk about what are the high sugar fruits, low sugar fruits, like berries. They're great. They're full of antioxidants, and you can eat plenty of them, but you have to be careful if you're overweight, have type 2 diabetes.
Yes. You know what? And you also did the same thing with a ranking of some of the top consumed fruits. So the number 1 for Americans, quote, fruit is orange juice. All right.
Yeah.
Which is bananas.
It's like drinking soda.
Same thing for me. That was my number 1 go-to. And let's see. And also, you cited a study in here linking it to diabetes as well. And next on the list is bananas, which we've talked about several times. Very hybridized. And you know, recently I had a conversation about this on another show. And the host is from Barbados. And he was like, you know what? I never thought about this. You're so right. We had some kind of, well, we just thought it was normal that there would be bigger seeds in our bananas, right? And
Right.
a lot of folks aren't aware that the bananas that we see, even if they're organic in conventional, in our conventional grocery stores, have been hybridized to the point that they can't reproduce on their own
Yeah.
anymore, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah, you go
so,
down in the South America, you see little red bananas and little funny little bananas. It's like very different bananas.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's a lot of work. We want it now. We want the sugar bomb and the so-called, the potassium hit. But what I want to talk about in regards to fruit is the fact that, number one, of course, we talked about what's going on there with insulin, but I want to talk about how we actually use them, right? So with fruit, look, we just mentioned banana. It's not saying that you can't ever have a banana,
No,
guys.
I mean, banana versus Doritos, go for the banana every day.
Yes. And so what's a more advantageous approach? Knowing that, potentially we can get into some issues with our glycemic
Yeah.
response with fruit. What should we target and what should we be aware of?
Well, the truth is we should be eating not like 5 to 9, but more like 9 to 11 servings of vegetables and fruit. And it shouldn't be fruits and vegetables. It should be vegetables and fruit. And, depending on your own individual unique needs, if you're an athlete, if you're healthy, you can consume more fruit. If you are a diabetic, if you're overweight, if you have a lot of sugar issues, I mean, you can binge on fruit. I mean, I used to have a diabetic patient who used to eat a plum and his blood sugar would skyrocket. So you have to see what works for you. Hopefully soon we're going to have an amazing new technology where you basically put a little device on your skin, it reads up to your iPhone, and it'll tell you exactly what your blood sugar is when you eat anything. So you'll know immediately what happens. And I can't wait for that day because I think people are going to know, gosh, I didn't realize when I ate blah, 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 this is what happened. Or when I ate this, it was actually good. So I think that's a really good thing to think about.
All right, let's jump over here now and really get to the meat.
Yeah.
Meat sans potatoes. And
I wonder when you get to the meat of the subject here.
And talk about meat. So this is a very, very controversial subject, and you highlight so many incredible studies and looking at is this actually an issue? Is this the causative agent when we see increases of cancer? This is one of the big things. If you eat too much red meat, it's going to cause heart disease, all this kind of things. So let's talk about this and make this like the definitive answer on this subject matter.
Well, look, Shawn, like you, I'm sure you want this too, but I want to live to be like 120 and be healthy. I don't want to do something stupid based on some principle or dogma that's going to make me sick. So, I was aware of the issues around meat, and meat's been vilified for a long time. First, because it has saturated fat. Saturated fat causes heart disease, so cut out the saturated fat. That's why my meat consumption has dramatically decreased in this country over the last 40, 50 years. We've had a lot more chicken, a lot less meat. That may not be a good thing. The second is, when I went to try to look at this, I said, okay, I'm a doctor, I'm a scientist, I'm going to go figure this out. So I got all the best papers on meat that I could find. I had researchers dig up all these papers. I printed them out. They were stacked high. I took them to a hotel room and I locked myself in for a week and I read everything. And I'm like, all right. So and I didn't read the headlines. I didn't read the abstracts. I read the methods. I read who they did the studies on, what their characteristics were, what the issues were. And what was interesting, there were really 3 issues that came up in that process. Mm-hmm. First was eating meat or not can be a moral issue. I've had Buddhist monks as patients. If they don't want to kill any animals, fine. That's fine. And they can figure out how to be a healthy vegan or vegetarian. And I teach them how to do that. The second is environmental. And absolutely, our factory farming of animals is one of the worst things that's happening in our society today. One, because it is destroying our environment. It's depleting our soils, which we need. If we only have desert and dust on this planet, we're dead. Second, the soils are needed to sequester carbon, which if not, it goes into the environment and causes climate change, goes in the oceans and acidifies the oceans, kills the phytoplankton, which produce half our oxygen. So we're going to suffocate. And the water also is required to be sequestered in the soil. If you have organic matter in the soil, it can hold tons of water. If you're growing food on dust and fertilizing it and putting all these chemicals on, it can't hold water, which is why we see mudslides and why we see droughts and why we see these crazy weather patterns. It's because of this. This actually, it's kind of by digression, but we had 60 million buffalo in this country, which kept the soils healthy and kept the water in the soils and prevented droughts. And then we killed 60 million buffalo and there were like 300 left. we got the big Dust Bowl in the 30s as a result of that. The almost destroyed America. So we're in that situation. And then, of course, there's runoff into the rivers that destroys the waterways. There's pesticides and insecticides that get loaded in the environment in our bodies. And it creates climate change. It uses 1/5 of our fossil fuels. So it depletes our 70% of the world's fresh water supplies is used to grow animals for human consumption. This is a big problem. So from the point of view of factory farmed animals, no, we shouldn't be eating those because it harms the planet, harms us, and in fact has much different nutrients in it, has far less antioxidants, glutathione peroxidase, catalase, less minerals, and it also has a different profile of fat. Wild meat or grass-fed meat has higher levels of omega-3 fats, whereas farm-raised meat is fed corn and soybean oil, and that has higher levels of the omega-6 fats, which can be inflammatory. Plus, these cows eat ground up animal parts, they eat feces, they eat candy. I mean, there was a giant truck that fell over on the highway somewhere that was filled with, out-of-date Skittles that they were bringing to feed the cows. So there's all kinds of stuff that we shouldn't, and plus there's hormones, antibiotics, there's pesticides in the meat. It's so much less healthy
Mark,
than
we got to talk about this. We got to talk about the candy, all right? So we've said this before. It's not you are what you eat, it's what you ate. And literally, like, we know what candy does to us. But this truck spill, and you talked about it, and this was all over the news. I see guys in here in the studio even shaking their head, remembering this coating over the freeway. Well, it was the freeway, right?
Red Skittles.
Red Skittles. And they were on their way to get fed to some cattle.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah.
Nuts.
Yeah. It is pretty nuts. So yes, from the environmental point of view, absolutely the wrong thing. But let's just take meat separately and look at the third issue, which is health. What do these studies show about the effect of meat on health? And, there was a period of time where a lot of studies were done. We call these population studies. They can't prove cause and effect. They basically ask people every year, what did you eat? And then they say, what disease did you have? And they correlate it and see if there's a connection. Now, there may be a connection. There may not be a connection. For example, smoking, they did this kind of study, and they found there was a 10 to 20 to 1 risk of cancer. With the meat studies, they might find a 20 or 30% increased risk of something, which is not really telling you anything in the context of a type of study that can't prove cause and effect. And when I looked at the characteristics of the meat eaters in these studies, it was like 500,000 people over many years, they were unhealthy because they were eating meat in an era where meat was bad. So if you ate meat, you didn't give a crap about your health. So you didn't exercise, you smoked, you drank, you didn't eat fruits and vegetables, you ate processed food, you ate more sugar and starch, and you weighed more, and you ate 800 calories more. Of course you had more disease. That's why these people seem to have more risk of disease. And this is shown over and over again. And when you look at interventional studies, where they actually give people a paleo diet, they actually do better. All their cardiovascular risk markers get better. All their inflammation gets better. Their weight goes down. So, we have to really look at the science here. And then, of course, there are studies looking at meat eaters and vegetarians who shop at health food stores. Both of their risk goes down in half because they're eating a healthy overall diet, and the meat in the context of an overall healthy diet is not an issue. So I think we have to really kind of rethink our whole negative view of meat. And then, of course, there's the issue of, of whether, meat causes cancer. And this was from the World Health Organization, and you shouldn't eat meat because it causes cancer. Well, it didn't find that meat causes cancer. What it found was that processed meat causes cancer. And it was a 20% increase in risk of colon cancer if you ate bacon and hot dogs and bologna and salami. What did the study actually show? The studies actually show that there was a 20% risk, which means your background risk of getting colon cancer, 5%. When you eat bacon, 4 pieces every day, your whole life, your risk goes from 5 to 6%. Now, unless you plan on eating bacon every day, 4 pieces your whole life, probably shouldn't do that. But a piece of bacon here and there is going to have a nominal increase in your risk. And we're talking about a 1% absolute risk increase. So we shouldn't be eating tons of hot dogs and processed meat, I agree. But the truth is that the risk is overstated and amplified.
Yes. And in the book, you consolidate, again, all the data. You're talking about the various types of meat and looking at, again, some studies and not just cherry picking. And then you give like a summation and saying, watch the amounts that you eat. It's not saying like, let's go ham crazy, and this makes me think about, for example, beef. That was for a while there. You know, people still say this, like, well, I don't eat red meat, you know, like it's the badge of honor because, you know, like this is going to give me a heart attack. And the research indicates very clearly that's not the case. But that doesn't mean you want to just go and start getting crazy with the beef. And this made me think about that movie. I think it was The Great Outdoors. Was it John Candy, right? Where he had the competition to try to eat this big, huge piece of steak. And I think, did he win? He held it down, but that's not what you want to do, you know. And you actually brought to bear this concept of a pegan, all right? Pegan. Yeah. You got to talk about this because when I saw it, I was like, that's hilarious.
It is. It was a joke. I mean, I was sitting with a friend and another friend on a panel at a conference. One was a paleo doc, and the other was a vegan cardiologist who was low fat. And they're like arguing and fighting. I'm like, listen, guys, you know, we're all friends. You're paleo, you're vegan, and I must be a pegan. And I was like, oh, that's funny. And everybody laughed. And then I was like, wait a minute, there's a lot of common sense in that. And I'm like, it's not extreme. It looks at, in each category, how do you choose what to eat? If you're going to eat grains, what are the healthiest grains? If you're going to eat meat, what's the healthiest meat? How much of each should you eat? The truth is that you look at those two camps and they agree on most stuff. One, we shouldn't be eating a diet high in sugar and starch. Two, we should be eating mostly vegetables and plant foods. Three, we should be eating good quality fats. 4, we should not eat chemicals and processed foods and hormones, antibiotics, GMO, and crap. And, you know, 5, we should, if we are raising animals, we should use sustainable practices. We should use regenerative agriculture. We should humanely treat the animals. If we're consuming fish, we should be sustainably harvesting them or sustainably raising them in fish farms that aren't toxic. And we should eat, you know, if we're going to eat grains, you probably don't want to eat a lot of the inflammatory starchy grains. You want to eat more things like buckwheat and quinoa. Stay away from a lot of the gluten grains. If you're eating dairy, you don't want to have factory farm dairy. You want, and by the way, both camps don't believe in dairy, and I'm not a big dairy fan. But if you're going to eat some dairy and you can tolerate it, it probably should be sheep or goat cheese, not cow dairy, which is full of inflammatory proteins and other factors that can be harmful. And I go through all the issues around dairy, despite the fact that our government says to consume 3 glasses of milk a day for everybody because it's going to prevent fractures and make your kids go strong and help you lose weight. None of those, by the way, are true. All of them have been disproved by science, not just my opinion. This is from the top scientists at Harvard who've challenged the government. And they said, well, sorry, this is what the Dairy Council says we have to put in there. So, and by the way, I'm not sure you know this, Shawn, but this fall, the National Academy of Sciences published a report that was commissioned by Congress to look at the integrity of the dietary guidelines process. Do you know about this?
Yeah.
And they essentially said the dietary guidelines process is corrupt, that scientists on it are funded by the food industry, and that they've ignored huge amounts of data, like all the data on saturated fat, they completely ignored because they use the wrong databases or they don't look at it or they discard it. And so the guidelines we think are valid guidelines that govern all of our food policies in America are actually corrupt and wrong. So, you know, we have to really rethink all this and change the way we view how we make sense of it. And that's really why I wrote Food, What the Heck Should I Eat? Because people just don't know. And I try to sift through all the difficulties because we hear some from scientists that can be corrupt. We hear from the government was corrupt. We hear the media, which is looking for headlines. You know, we have the food industry giving us nonsense, like health claims, which seem to say the food is healthy because it's got whole grain Cookie Crisp cereal. And I try to make sense of it and simplify it in a way that people can just eat real food and know what to eat.
When you hear about these different topics, you know, like, and you go in and like really make a compelling argument about, look, we really want to avoid these pesticides and herbicides. You need to get organic. Costs. We really need to be mindful of the fact of eating that factory farmed conventional beef. You're going to have higher ratios of omega-6 fatty acids, more inflammatory, and you're going to be missing out on all these key nutrients you're supposed to be eating it for. Price goes up, grass-fed, right? So these things become an issue, you know, even in our non-perishable goods. So what do people do? All right, what do people actually do, Mark?
Well, you know, that's a great question. Now, the food industry has taught us that it's difficult, it's expensive, it's inconvenient to eat good food. That's only for rich people and the elite. That's not true. You know, I just want to tell you a quick story, and then I'll loop back to what the resources are that I go through in the book, Food, What the Heck Should I Eat, on how to eat well for less. I went to South Carolina as part of the movie Fed Up to a family of 5, lived in a trailer, food stamps and disability, and it was really a sad situation. And they lived in one of the worst food deserts in America. And everything they ate was from a box, a package, or can that had some kind of health claim on it, like low-fat salad dressing that was soybean oil and high fructose corn syrup. Or Cool Whip, which had 0 trans fat on the label, but was actually all trans fat and sugar. But the only way they could say that was because the government, FDA, gave them a loophole that it has less than half a gram per serving. They can say 0 trans fats. So they were completely hoodwinked by the food industry. And I showed them how to cook one meal. I gave them a guide called Good Food on a Tight Budget by the Environmental Working Group. And I gave them my cookbook. I said, you guys can do this. And you know what? They did it in one of the worst food deserts in America on barely any money. They learned how to cook and shop and eat real food for less, and they lost 200 pounds in the first year. The son lost 128 pounds and now is going to medical school. That's the kind of thing that we need to start thinking about. How do we empower families as one meal at a time, one person at a time? As part of the Dr. Oz show, I went down to this family, another family in Florida, northern Florida, and they lived on a hobby farm. It was kind of an expanded trailer. There was I think 6 of them in the family. They were massively obese. I mean, they're unbelievably overweight from the little kid all the way up. And I went down with them and I went to their place and I taught them the same thing, how to cook. Here's what we're doing. I got them a nutritionist to help support them. And they lost 335 pounds. And I went down to their kitchen after they'd sort of gotten rolling on this. And I looked in the kitchen. I saw nuts and I saw almond butter and I saw avocados and coconut oil. And I'm like, isn't this more expensive for you? How are you guys affording this? And you know what they said? They said, Dr. Hyman, we were buying, each of us in the family, a case of Coke every week. We had all these junk food we were buying. We were buying all this other food. And we didn't realize actually how we just stopped doing that and that we actually are saving money eating this way. So I think if you learn how to do this and get the right resources to get the foods you need, it's totally doable.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Dr. Hyman, you are the man, and I appreciate you immensely. Truly one of the greatest teachers walking around on the planet, and I hope to see you just doing so much more. And I don't see you slowing down anytime soon because food hit us like, wow, man, such a great book. Can you let everybody know again where to pick up the book and where they can connect with you online?
Yeah, foodthebook.com. Check it out. You can go to my website, drhyman.com, sign up for our weekly newsletter. I get a weekly recipe. It's awesome food. There's lots of free information, lots of free videos. I just encourage you to check it out because I really am on the planet to help people get healthy. I know how close we are to changing things, and it's going to take every one of us changing what we do, voting with our fork 3 times a day, and making the world a better place. So that's what I'm about, and I hope you can join in on that mission.
Perfect. Dr. Mark Hyman, everybody. Hey, if you like this video, make sure to check out this video right here to up-level your health today.
Look, 2 studies now have looked at the very specific type of fat that's building up in your arteries. Newsflash, they didn't come from your food. They came from the bacteria in your gut. They are fats made by bacteria. All of this vegan nonsense about, oh, you can't eat fat, animal products cause cardiovascular